Hi, my name is Franco Cavaleri, coming to you with another segment of Potential Within. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about thyroxine, the thyroid gland, T4 and T3. A lot of misconception in the marketplace. We've had a lot of questions come up. And I got to tell you, let me reach out here. This was, in fact, a subject matter that was quite hot about a decade ago. I have an article, two articles, in fact, there's a part one and part two on our Biologic website, and that was published 14 years ago. And so I've kind of going to regurgitate a little bit of that in our program today, but add more of the current research that's trending in that arena. Now, thyroid health is a pretty significant matter. I mean, if you're hypothyroidism, where the thyroid gland's not producing enough thyroxine, a lot of things are going to go wrong. You think about it, the thyroid gland kind of sets the idling and the pace of your cells, and the general energy expenditure that the body and the mind will experience. And if the thyroxine levels aren't functioning at full capacity, and it's a lot more than just thyroid levels, there's different types of thyroxine circulating in the body that need to be managed properly. And I think the way conventional allopathic medicine has moved to testing only TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone, has created a significant limitation on how we deal with thyroid insufficiency or hypothyroidism. So, this is something that I studied intensely about 15 to 20, actually about 30 years ago while I was competing, because obviously maintaining optimal thyroid activity is critically important for athletes, but it goes far deeper than that. If you are experiencing insufficient levels and activity, and again, I'm going to highlight that the levels and the activity level of thyroxine are two different things, because there are more active forms of thyroxine in the body, like T3, over those that we generally will test for when they're testing for thyroid activity, like T4. T4 tends to be the thyroxine that is pooled and is not necessarily active, but is converted by the liver to T3. So let's start a little bit back into symptoms of hypothyroidism. If you're experiencing fatigue, it's hard to get up in the morning, brittle nails, dry skin, brittle hair, thinning hair, lack of drive, even irritability. All these things can be a function of hypothyroidism. There are a lot of things that cause it, and it's an interesting phenomenon where we in first worlds have contributed to the escalation of hypothyroidism and insufficient thyroid function. So most people know that iodine is a critical element for the synthesis and manufacturing of healthy thyroxine in the body. And the thyroid gland is very particular and diligent about scavenging and getting all the iodine it needs in order to function normally. If your body is insufficiently absorbing or unavailable, or iodine itself is unavailable, your thyroid production will be insufficient. And that could very well be one cause that contributes to hypothyroidism or activity. However, it's interesting to note that there's a lot of biological intrusions that can interfere with thyroid activity that we're all exposed to on a daily basis. And I find it mind-boggling that we still see these compounds in our environment, in our foods, and they compete. They compete with iodine, so that what happens is fluoride is very similar to iodide. Um, and so is bromide, and so is chloride. And so we see a lot of fluoridation in our water. We see a lot of chlorination in our waters for the treatment of water to um, have the chlorinations serve as an as a cleansing agent, antibacterial, antifungal, and in some cases even antiviral. But the fluoridation is obvious. That's something that was included to support bone density and mainly oral health and improve teeth, the enamel on our teeth. But the challenge is that this fluoridation is now being shown in research to cause more problems biologically than even interference with thyroid activity. And so an interesting phenomenon has developed amongst the human population when it comes to fluoridation, chlorination, even bromide. Bromide's used in place of chlorine in pools, in hot tubs, and in other applications as an insecticide and bactericide. But these ions, they compete with iodine in the thyroid gland and interfere with iodine uptake by the thyroid and therefore contribute to hypothyroidism. I mean, one of the things that can happen in cases where the thyroid gland is starving for iodine or needing to put more thyroxine in circulation and really kind of gasping to do so, goiter, where the thyroid gland enlarges in order to try to accommodate for thyroxine demand in the body because it's not being utilized and produced properly. But we don't see goiter that common in society in first world countries anymore because we have iodized our salt. And that's why we have iodized salt. It's the iodine in the salt that has provided for a prolific source of iodine so that we don't have these limitations for the thyroid gland. But the thyroid gland can be affected significantly by, radioactive activity. X-rays in a mild fashion can affect the thyroid gland, but primarily nuclear activity, as we know, because those nuclear isotopes and nuclear residues can damage the thyroid gland and interfere with, again, iodine uptake. And in fact, saturating with iodine, if nuclear exposure is to be had, is one way to prevent or full on damage by the nuclear residues that may affect the thyroid gland. So I want to go into some detail about analytics when you go test your thyroid to determine whether it's functional, because most of the tests involved testing TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone, TSH. And if your TSH is too high, what happens is that we assume that thyroxine levels in the body are low. So if TSH levels are low when you test them, it's assumed that your thyroxine levels in the body are sufficient or high. See, it's an inverse relationship because TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone, it stimulates the thyroid to produce thyroxine, you see? And if your thyroxine levels that are circulating throughout the body are sufficient, your TSH levels are going to be low because it's not going to be produced to induce secretions of thyroxine by the thyroid gland. But if thyroid levels tend to drop in the body, then TSH levels are high. And then the doctor is going to think that we have a problem with thyroid levels in the body. Now, the common prescription to treat such a condition, typically if thyroxine levels are low in the body, would be to prescribe levothyroxine. Now, this is where we get into complications and more complex situation that you should know about when you go test for thyroxine levels. And because the levothyroxine that's prescribed, the synthroid typically, it is T4. You see, your thyroid gland produces for the major part T4. Okay, this is a type of thyroxine that needs to be converted by your liver through methylation into T3. And T3 is the highly acting or the more active version of thyroxine, T3. And so when you're prescribed levothyroxine, or synthroid as the brand is called, you're supplying the body with T4. Now, T4 serves as a pool of thyroxine in the body that circulates, that's relatively inactive. And as your body requires active thyroxine, the liver will convert the T4 into T3 by methylation. A lot of things can go wrong where T3 is not produced in significant amounts because the liver is not functioning sufficiently. You may not have enough cofactors. B vitamins are important. Trimethylglycine as a methylation source. All these things support the conversion of T4 to T3. However, if the liver is not at full capacity, then T3 is not produced in sufficient amounts to begin stimulating the body and the cells to do the work that you expect it to do, to begin to stimulate your levels of energy, your drive, mentation. Because if, again, thyroid levels are insufficient, not only is obesity a challenge, because obviously your caloric expenditure by basal metabolic rate declines and you're not able to expend energy, but your energy levels to be active are low. You have no drive. Depression is often an issue. And again, I'm going to just name a few of these things I named earlier, a few of these symptoms, and so that people are aware, brittle hair, loss of hair, thinning hair, itchy, dry skin, brittle fingernails. These are all signs of hypothyroidism. And in fact, cardiovascular disease risk increases when your body's not producing sufficient amounts of thyroxine. LDL, low density lipoprotein, which is a type of cholesterol, it's called, quote unquote, the bad cholesterol, can be elevated as a function of low functioning thyroxine. And so there's a lot of things that can go wrong as secondary factors if the thyroid gland is not producing what you need. But here's an interesting fact, and I want you to think about this phenomenon. If T3 levels are not sufficient enough for the body to stimulate cells, then what happens is you get a cyclical down spiral, where the liver itself is not getting enough functionality to be able to convert T3. So by supplying T4, and this is where it gets frustrating for me to conceptualize, by supplying T4 on its own as a solution or a treatment to hypothyroidism is not sufficient, because you need to prime the entire network with T3. See, your thyroid gland will produce small amounts of T3, but the majority of its output is T4, the pool of thyroxine that circulates relatively inactive. Remember, T3 is the active form that's converted primarily by the liver into its active T3 form from T4. But if the metabolism in general is not functioning at full capacity because thyroxine levels have been insufficient for a long time, then how is the liver supposed to function at full capacity to produce enough stimulatory T3 from the T4? You see the cyclical problem and the catch-22 that we have. And so if you go in to test for low thyroxine levels, you need to demand for a test of T4 and T3 to understand better what that ratio is, so you know where the problem may be. Secondly, if you are to use a treatment in the form of thyroxine, you need to find a doctor that will prescribe a combination of T4 and T3. And therefore, then you get the primer, the priming agent for the body, T3, and T4 as the pool. That's a backup supply for the body to begin to convert. Without supplying T3, if everything has slowed down to a halt, how are we supposed to expect the body to go back into normal function when we supply the precursor for T3, such as T4, levothyroxine, or synthroid, which is the common prescription, without knowing the body can actually convert it into the active T3? And this is in the grand scheme, has been a significant controversy in relation to thyroxine activity and the thyroid gland. But there's more that actually complicates this, and it becomes quite interesting because when we think about how we achieved the TSH levels the range that we accepted as the normally or normal functioning range for the human population. So the TSH range is from 0.5 to 5. So 0.5 to 5. And remember, it's an inverse relationship with activity, which means if your TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone levels, are at 0.5, they're low, it means that you're producing enough thyroxine. The body's saying, I don't need to produce thyroid stimulating hormone to stimulate the thyroid to produce more thyroxine because there's lots out there. But if your TSH levels are high, again, I'm repeating myself just for clarity, TSH levels are high, it means that the body's trying to pump more thyroxine out because it's not feeling any active thyroxine. And the production of thyroxine may not be the problem. It may be the conversion of thyroxine from T4 to T3. That's the problem that would be creating an effect. And if we supply more T4, we are not fixing the problem through a prescriptive levothyroxine. You see, this is why we need to test for T3 and T4 levels in order to know where the problem is in the body. But the bigger problem is that the mean of the population, so not the average, but the mean of the population's level of TSH was chosen some time ago in a population in North America where we're all compromised, likely compromised, of thyroxine production and thyroid activity. Why? Because of fluoridation, chlorination, and bromine. So it's an interesting phenomenon where we've selected the mean that we expect and the range for TSH being 0.5 to 5 when it is now being said, wait a minute, maybe the mean that we chose is not accurate because it's a function of a compromised population because we compromised our water with chlorine and fluorine. And also then we have the bromine additive in a lot of things. So it's an interesting phenomenon where the range might be changed to 0.3 to 3, and this has been in dialogue for a while. And so I say then to you listening that you should check your thyroid levels because there's a lot of things that can interfere with them. You know, if you've ever had to use corticosteroids for treatment of a serious inflammatory condition, it intensely interferes with thyroxine activity and thyroid production of thyroxine. There's autoimmune conditions that affect the thyroid gland, Hashimoto's disease, which attacks the thyroid gland and damages it. Thyroiditis, which could be an infection that's idiopathic or unknown source. And that infection can cause hyperactivity in the thyroid gland where you have more thyroxine produced for a short period of time during the infection, but then eventually it burns out and then you have hypothyroidism in place of the hyperthyroidism. So, you know, there's a lot of things that can affect the thyroid gland, including many of the medications that we may take for common disorders. And I think that, you know, especially if you're suffering from, you know, fatigue, lack of drive, obesity, you just can't get the weight off. Remember the thinning hair, the brittle hair, itchy skin, dry skin, brittle nails, then check your TSH level, thyroid stimulating hormone. But ask for a profile and an analysis of T4 to T3 so that you know if you have a conversion problem internally. And then when you need treatment, or if you need treatment, your life will change. But the thyroxine you're going to get treatment with needs to be a combination of T4 and T3. And if you need it, don't avoid it, because your entire life will change. Your drive will improve, mentation will improve, sharpness will improve, your ability to be more, to get involved in exercise and be more active, that'll improve. And it's worthwhile getting that checked. And again, check for the T4 and T3. You might have to pay for a T4, T3 profile. Might be $50, but it's worth your while. Anyways, that's a short thyroxine episode that I expected, and I expect more questions to come in. We've been flooded with thyroxine questions and thyroid questions over the last month, so that's why I brought this back into the front lines. And I hope you got a little bit from that to move in the right direction in terms of thyroxine. Thank you very much.